Do you want to get delicious quilted texture with your home machine? I'm Christina Cameli, author of the book Step-by-Step Texture Quilting, and I quilted all these designs on my home machine, and I want to tell you the tricks about how I did it. So you can probably see that there's a lot of free motion quilting in these designs, and a lot of great texture comes through, especially on these solid pieces. This is a great technique for places that there's a lot of solids or almost solids, places with a lot of negative space on your quilt. What may not be as obvious with these designs is that each one of them started by me stitching a grid with my walking foot. So this is my walking foot. It has this little movable fork on it, and when I move the fork, that causes this sort of walking action in the bottom of the foot. What I need to make sure of is that when I put this foot on my machine, that this little fork is going over the screw that's on the needle bar. And that way when the needle goes up and down, the fork goes up and down, and the foot works. It may be that you have a different walking foot. Some walking feet just have a paddle here instead of a fork. So if you have that paddle, just set the paddle on top of that screw so it can still go up and down. You may also have an attachment for your walking foot. Mine looks a little complicated. Many of them look like sort of a funny shaped L or J. Mine attaches to the side here, and what that's going to allow me to do is if I follow along the last line I stitched with this spacer bar, I'm going to get an evenly spaced line with my next quilted line. And if I keep doing that, all my lines are going to be the same distance apart. If you don't have one of these, that's fine. You can just measure and mark out all the lines that you want to quilt. So here's a standard grid that I like to use. Here's how I go about quilting that. I start by marking a center line right down the middle of my piece, and then I'll quilt that line with the walking foot. And from there, I'm going to work outward, quilting evenly spaced lines in either direction. After I've gotten all the lines going the one direction, I'm going to turn the whole thing and do the same thing on the other side, and then I'll have my whole grid quilted. And so this is what I would call a standard grid. There's also a way to use the angled lines on your regular quilting ruler to create angled grids, like a diamond grid or an on-point grid. And the details for all of that are in the book. Once you've got your grid finished, then it's time for the real fun, because you're going to take off the walking foot, lower your feed dogs or set your stitch length to 0, and then put on the free motion foot, and you can quilt whatever design calls to you. There's a lot of ideas in the book. Here are some ideas that I think look great in the standard grid. You'll see that we've got circles, and there's spirals, there's feathers, and some fun arc shapes and fans. So pick something that appeals to you. I recommend that before you start stitching something new, that you try sketching it first. That's going to get you familiar with the flow of the design, make sure you understand how the shapes are working together, and also get an idea about how we're moving from grid space to grid space, because sometimes we're connecting through the corners, and sometimes we're actually going to move along the grid line. What I want you to know about is that in the book, I've left these pages of blank grids, and you can photocopy these as many times as you want, so you have lots of place to practice the designs that you want to get familiar with, or even audition new designs that you've thought of yourself and see how they look once they're all out in a grid. Now, all these samples that I brought to show are pretty small because I want you to see the great variety that's available with this technique, but you may be wondering, is this appropriate for a larger size quilt? And I would say absolutely. I want to show you this quilt that I made. I quilted this with one of the designs in the book. I started with the diamond grid and then split it into a triangle grid. The instructions for that are in the book too. And then I went inside with the free motion foot and did this design in every grid space. And let me pull it over to the back so you can see the fun texture that created. I think what's so nice about using this technique to quilt your quilt is that after you've quilted the grid, your whole piece is basted. So if you use, say, basting pins like I do, your pins can be all the way out and out of the way. And then when you go to free motion quilt it, you just have to focus on one little grid space at a time. And I find that really relaxing, like, oh, I just have to quilt in this one, and then I move on to the next one, and little bit by little bit, the quilt is finished. So if you've tried free motion quilting in a grid, leave a comment below. Let me know how it went for you. If you haven't tried it yet, get in there and amaze yourself. My name's Christina Cameli. My book is Step-by-Step Texture Quilting. Look for it at your favorite quilt shop. And I wish you happy stitching.